Christian, how are you today, sir?
Doing well, Jared. Thanks for having me back. Always good to see
Oh,
you.
my pleasure. And for those of you who don't know, Christian has been on, I think, three times now. This will be the fourth because we did two solo
Yep.
and then once with Dr. Salerno,
Yep.
you and me. So three
That's right.
times so far.
hmm
And you've been on a roll recently with all of your Instagram and Facebook content. Is anything behind that? Any motivating force that's really been driving you recently?
No, the algorithmic gods are just blessing me. I think it comes in waves and then it disappears. So I don't. I mean, I don't. I don't know. I've noticed an uptick in the engagement too, but it was like last year at this time, it was even more. So I've never know like why things like this happen. There's never really, I actually put very little foresight into like my content creation. Like I don't, I kind of started doing this just off a whim, and I'm probably like the most, unassuming, it's just not something I really think about too much. I think with Instagram, it just kind of comes and goes. But it's good, I mean, I think, the more I talk narcissism, the better. Some of the other areas of the content, also get play. But I think there's more value for people in talking about mental health and about consciousness and about narcissistic abuse.
Right. And I think people, what they really relate to when you talk is you have the experience with it, right? You grew up
Mhm.
with a narcissistic parent, and that really kind of flavors how you talk
Mhm.
about everything. So, and one of the expressions that you've said that I really think is like spot on the money is they reflect back to us a distorted version of
Mhm.
ourselves. Could
Mhm.
you expand on that?
Sure. I mean, so the narcissist, at least as I see it, kind of lives in their own fantasy world, right? And so they're not responding to and reflecting back the reality of the child or whoever they're in a relationship with. They're reflecting back whatever they're perceiving them to be within this kind of distorted internal reality. And so what happens with the children is the children's emotional state is never like accurately mirrored back to them. The children's like authentic feelings or thoughts are usually reframed and misdirected. And so it creates this kind of dysmorphic relationship with self for the children, right? I always kind of talk about the way our authentic selves as children, and people ask what that authentic self means. We can talk about that, but the way that narcissistic abuse from a parent to a child is essentially the attempted murder of the authentic self. And so, because of this mirror, the child learns showing themselves, right? Every time they show themselves, it gets reframed and reflected back differently. Over time, they unconsciously learn to hide themselves, right? There's
Mm.
this kind of filter, this unconscious filter that's placed on the child of, is this safe? And since a child is seeking connection to their parents, and every authentic expression leads to further disconnection, it creates a kind of, let's say, um, dysfunctional relationship to our sense of self.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense too. And I think the other version of it you've said I really liked is they are an unreliable narrator.
Mhm, mhm. I would agree that includes literature studies. So, pulling from art, I find when dealing with narcissism, metaphor and kind of like comparison and using kind of examples that go outside of the kind of norm really help. And so, this idea of an unreliable narrator, again, it all begins with how profoundly like delusional narcissists are. I think we actually sell short the actual disorder, right? We think they're intentionally lying. We think they're kind of in control of all of this behavior, but they're not really. And so how they see their children's lives is a reflection of their distorted fantasy world, not a reflection of life. And so, I'll give an example from my life. I was going through mental health problems and uncovering my trauma. And this was in my late 30s. And I was speaking to my father, and he says, I want to come down there and help you. And I said, okay, but can you help me in the way that I need help? And we've done this before. And what he reflected back to me was the problem was that I needed to get a job. Now, I was in mental health crisis at this point. Do I need a job? Sure, that's always better than not having a job. But his reading of my problem has always been that I cost him money. So instead
Right.
of like being able to meet me in my mental health crisis and provide any sort of emotional support or actual parenting, it just gets reduced to financial issues, right, to transactional issues. And so what was reflecting back to me was that I didn't really matter as a person. I only mattered as a producer, or as a earner. I mean, my father is successful, and I've always felt like just like a kind of line on his balance sheet, right? And so there's never been a reflection back to me from him about my emotional state, about what's actually going on in my life. My problems, are always kind of seen through his filter, and it's never accurate. Again, like, could I have? I mean, it's funny because I said, "Oh, really? A job? Like, where would I work?" And I live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and he said Foxconn, which was a Chinese company that makes iPhones. That was on the front page of the newspaper every day because they were negotiating with our government. I said, "Oh, really? The one that's on the front? What would I do there?" And it was it just showed the kind of way that after that I realized I had to go no contact because this person, I was in emotional, like real mental health crisis, like what happens when we start really unpacking our trauma and kind of digging into what's going on inside of us. And I realized, like, oh, this is just something, like, I mean, I kind of saw in his eyes, like, I think he wanted to be a good dad, and then what comes out is get a fucking job, which he's been saying. I mean, I he's not wrong. My employment history as a young person was spotty at best, but at that particular point in time, this was about trauma and the need for an actual parent, not like a boss, basically.
Right. I mean, and the value to them is what we provide, like
Right.
what we do. It's not about just, oh, you're just good as you are. It's no, what are you doing for me, or what are you providing?
Extrinsic versus intrinsic value hierarchies, right? Where it's
Right.
like I thought Sentimental Value this year as a movie was a really nice exploration of a narcissistic dad of a specific type, but the title itself like hints at what's lacking in the narcissistic parents' relationship to their children. There's no value for you just existing as their child, right? The value is, like you said, like how you fit into their kind of idealized version of self, right? So it's like, is your job good? Are you good at sports, right? There's no actual like intrinsic value of like, I love and care for this person simply because they're my son or my daughter. It fundamentally, I mean, I think one of the ways narcissism is so confusing is they don't live up to the linguistic expectations of words. Like when we
Mhm.
say parent, there's all sorts of assumptions that are made about the kind of connection between those two people, the parent and the child. And a narcissist can certainly create a child, but they can't ever see the child nor connect to the child. And so all of these assumptions we have when we say the word parent, even partner, they don't live up to them, or relationship, when we're having a romantic relationship with them. There's an assumption of some sort of connection or some sort of kind of mutual shared space. The narcissist doesn't share space. The relationship is one of supply extraction and exploitation and domination, and lacks kind of what we expect. I mean, they're constantly upending our understanding of human behavior and words,
Right.
if
And it's
that
like
makes
you
sense.
said, they always find something to pick at too. They always
Mhm.
find something that you need to be doing better. And they might
Yeah,
frame it as, oh, I'm just holding you accountable. Or they'll try
yeah,
to bring
yeah,
up your
yeah, yeah,
insecurities or
yeah,
vulnerabilities, but it's always something that they
yeah,
try to bring up and
yeah.
then throw in your face.
Yeah, I mean, again, like in the financial abuse is hard to talk about because it involves being given money. But that was the thing with my father and I, where he didn't parent at all, like not at all. He didn't teach me anything. He threw money at all these problems, created an environment of dependency, and then faulted me for the dependency. Like even in like we're estranged, right? Like he has a restraining order on me because I was incredibly angry. But even in the restraining order complaint, which was written by his wife and signed by him, it's totally crazy. It says all Chris wants is money. No, I wanted a dad, right? I
Right.
wanted I wanted to be prepared for life. And people will kind of make this into a competition and say, well, I know people that didn't have parents, but like the absence of a narcissistic, it's not neutral. They're literally sabotaging us. We're literally kind of having our lives and our functionality shaped in the shadow of their dysfunction. And so they do. And so, like you said, they'll always find something to pick on. And whatever that area is that they're picking on will create dysfunction in us. I've had to work really hard to be financially independent, to even like think about money. Like for me, it was like when my dad discarded my mother, they just stopped talking. Right. He wouldn't talk to her. And so the only time they would talk was to argue about money. And as like a 10-year-old kid looking up at this, you'd go ask your mom for something. She'd say, your dad doesn't love us. He doesn't give us enough money. And then you'd go ask your dad and he'd say, well, that's why I give your mom money. And this kid is looking up and going, well, the only thing I can really determine is that neither one of my parents wants to take care of my needs. And off we go on shame-based dysfunction around meeting our own needs, right? Around addressing and meeting our own needs. I always say adult children of narcissists have needs blindness or needs dysmorphia. They're systems of trauma and systems of shame related to meeting our own needs, whether they're financial, physical, hygiene, whatever. It's rooted in where this kind of dysfunctional like policing is with them, right? I mean, the money thing is crazy because like it's I believe we can have money disorders like eating disorders, right? That we can have disorders around a lot of our needs. That the easiest comparison would be an eating disorder. It's also the body dysmorphia and eating disorders are also interesting when it comes to these mirrors, right? Because
Mm.
like where might body dysmorphia come from? A narcissistic parent telling you you're fat when you're skinny. I mean, I got a scale for Christmas one time,
Ah,
right? I mean, my stepmother is malignant and is a former model, and like they literally gave us like step on scales. I looked at my sister and I'm like, what the fuck is this? And she's like, oh, this is a nice scale. I'm like, they're calling us fat, right? Like, right? I would say
yeah,
like your face doesn't look so bloated today because I was drinking back then, right? But they
yeah,
they gave me like a calorie book for all of fast food restaurants. Just like mind fucking. Where like I'm a big guy, like I'm 6'4". Like in my drinking years, when I checked into rehab, I was like 256, so I was actually pretty big. I think I'm probably like 220 now, but it's like they go at the weirdest things, right? Like it's. But again, it's about how they need you to be, or they just need something. I mean, it's been I think that's been one of the toughest areas of recovery is seeing ourselves clearly and then accepting ourselves in that clear vision of ourselves, because a lot of times there's a lot of dysfunction that emerges, right? And to me the healing begins actually with the acceptance of it,
mm,
and the kind of saying like, okay, I've got a lot of work to do but I still love myself, right? That cultivation of self-love in spite of all of the conditioning, in spite of all of the imperfections, to me is where most of the recovery work is.
yeah.
That it's this relationship to self, this ability to kind of see ourselves clearly, accept ourselves. We've got a little cat in the chat. This is Selassie. Hey, buddy.
Hey there, bud. I mean, and you're reminding me of so many things of my own upbringing too. One would be it's just not acceptable to put yourself first and
Mhm,
do what is best for you. Because if you do, you're going to get guilt tripped,
mhm,
you're going to get shamed, you're going to get criticized, put down, belittled, or invalidated in some
mhm,
way. And
mhm,
I believe this is one of the ways that people pleasers develop, right? They're so
mhm,
used to
mhm,
when it's time to assert themselves, especially if it comes down to making someone else unhappy,
mhm,
like disappointing other people.
mhm.
It's very uncomfortable for them, right? They just have this aversion to it because when they were growing up, it just wasn't okay. Like if
Right,
you were to do something that's good for you,
right,
your parents would say, it's not going to kill you. Just get
right,
over it. What are you
right,
this? What are you? And it's
right.
just,
Well,
ugh.
people pleasing is essentially self abandonment, right? It's like
Yep.
I will abandon myself to maintain this connection. And so I think of narcissistic relationships like this, a normal relationship or a healthy relationship, person A here, person B here, they move into a shared space, right? The narcissist never moves. And so what happens is we become engulfed in their reality. And in order to maintain peace, we give ourselves away. And that's where the people pleasing comes from. That's where a lot of dysfunction comes from, this attempt to maintain a connection to, ironically, somebody that we're not actually connected to, right? That like the connection never comes, but the child's safety relies on seeking that connection. I also think that's why children of narcissists end up dating narcissists all the time, because they're conditioned to see the relationship space as one of self-abandonment, right?
And that happens a lot too. And I think, and overall, with that whole thing, it's a hard pattern to break out of
Mhm,
because that's just what you're used to. And think
mhm,
about the difference between someone that grows up with a narcissistic parent or more than one versus the ones that did not. It can be the compound effect of both is
mhm,
night and day over
mhm,
time. And it's
mhm,
just, I always say some people, they need support from their family, and other
mhm,
people, they need support because of their family,
mhm,
right?
mhm.
And it's just, it's night and day the difference between the two.
Yeah, yeah. So much of the experience of dealing with a narcissist, especially when it's your parent, upends our kind of unconscious feelings of safety and danger, right? We're culturally being told our parents love us, they're safe, we should listen to them, we should trust them. But when your parent's a narcissist, they're fundamentally unsafe. And so what we experience through the condition of safety, through everybody telling us they're safe, is actually danger, and it gets flip-flopped, right? That our unconscious kind of recognizes things in symbols. And so again, like when we go out into the world, we tend to gravitate towards dangerous relationships at the expense of safe ones, because we don't have the lived experience of what safety actually feels like within a relationship space, right? We don't it's like that old song, I want to know what love is. We don't know what love is. We don't know what it feels like to be loved. And in fact, we've I've always said, like, love isn't like a definition in a book, right? At least how we interpret it internally in our consciousness. I believe it's what we experience in our family, our nervous system, and our kind of mind interpret as love. And so, when we go out into the world, we respond somatically or unconsciously, to what we got in our family. And so, when your parents are narcissist, like, you're a kid, so you can't like say, I'm going to set boundaries and leave. You're literally trapped in a relationship with them. And so we're conditioned to deal with the narcissistic energy by staying and chasing instead of setting boundaries and leaving. And that carries on into our lives until we actually kind of deconstruct our parental and familial relationships, and learn to set boundaries. A lot of it is learning to be alone too, is learning to walk away. I think so many people stay in narcissistic relationships out of a fear of being alone, that we kind of push past the red flags, or we push past like what we're feeling. There might be kind of alarms going off internally, but because we have a, maybe anxious attachment or whatever, being alone is difficult.
Hmm. And speaking of boundaries, why do you think, I know what you'll say, but why are narcissists compelled to cross boundaries?
Well, so a narcissistic supply is rooted in feeling powerful and in control, right? And so anything that compels their behavior from outside their own internal logic makes them feel not powerful and not in control. And so that upends this transaction they're always having. And so when you tell them where a boundary is, they are almost pathologically compelled to cross it, because fuck you, basically. Don't tell me what to do. And you're basically telling them, this is where you can hurt me. Right. And so when their malignancy kicks in, you have basically given them a roadmap to putting you into emotional distress. Because again, like with narcissists, I said this today on a video, like, it's not about boundaries and trust, it's about leverage and consequences, right? It's the ability to have leverage over them and enforce consequences when they step out of line. And if we can't enforce consequences on them for boundary invasions, it becomes a question whether we should openly set boundaries with them. This is why people go, this is why no contact becomes the like, and the kind of blanket answer for dealing with them, because holding them accountable, it,
Yeah.
it never seems to work out, right? Because they fundamentally can't hold themselves accountable. And so you have to actually enforce consequences on them in order to get them to kind of, they respond to ridicule and force, basically.
And that's the thing, right? I mean, the best consequence is no contact. But like
Mhm,
you said, they feel compelled to get around your no contact. They kind of
Mhm,
see it as a challenge, or in other
mhm,
forms, like you said, they'll see it as an invitation, or, oh,
mhm,
this is the roadmap of how I can hurt this person. They
mhm,
don't like it.
mhm.
So I'm going to make sure I poke and poke and poke and prod and prod and prod to do anything. And this is, I think, what people who haven't lived it, and you and I, we both lived it in
Mhm,
many forms, but they just don't get it because they don't get how relentless they're going to be to
mhm,
try to cross your boundaries
mhm,
or to break your no contact if you're no
mhm.
contact. Like we always say this, right? We say, everyone says, cut the narcissist off, to which I
Mhm.
agree. But then the next question I've been coming up with lately is, well, it's not always possible because
Right,
of work,
right,
family,
right.
co-parenting, which is really counter-parenting,
Mhm.
and then finances. So we need to have that part of the conversation too. And I think there's another conversation to be had about when there's narcissists in the family, how difficult it is just to cut off one, right?
It
Like,
always ripples out to the extended family. A relationship with a narcissist is a tug of war for reality, right? And so it splits social systems. I think of narcissism as like an interpersonal virus that infects social systems. And once the narcissism kind of enters the bloodstreams of these webs of relationships, it forces people to pick sides. Which reality are we living in? The narcissist reality or reality itself that we're all sharing, right? That is a negotiation in a certain way. Now, because of the nature of the parent-child relationship, the parent's reality is the reality the rest of the family knows, right? Because nobody's listening to a 7-year-old or a 10-year-old, or by the time they're teenagers or old enough to have their own opinion, they've most likely been scapegoated to the whole family. And so going no contact usually isn't possible just with one parent. It ripples out into siblings, into aunts, into uncles, into all sorts of things. One of the reasons I started talking about narcissistic abuse was that I felt no contact was an insufficient answer for the kids. Right. That I mean, when we become adults, sure. I think when I started, I had this fantasy of like talking to younger people about it and helping them get to know it early. Now I quickly began to understand you can't really drop this stuff on younger people. That like as children of narcissists, and I work with this a lot with the other parent trying to help their children. The sad reality is the child is in a relationship with a narcissist, in a parental relationship. They're going to have to come to terms with this on their own in a certain way, that we can kind of like give them the language and give, but it takes, like, I always kind of compare it like you got to touch the flame over and over until you realize what's really there, because breaking a parental bond, going no contact from your parents, is the worst thing a person has to do. Like, nothing bothers me more than this conversation online between the kind of estranged parent crowd that's so infected with narcissism, that claim like kids are doing this flippantly. I'm sure some are, maybe, or kids are doing this because they heard something on the internet or on TikTok. The reality is it's one of the hardest things to do. It's hell, actually. Like, I hate being estranged from my family just because it feels like what do you like, what do you have? Like, it puts us alone in a world that we're not ready to deal with.
right.
um
I mean, but here's the other thing. Like you said, I saw you said this today. Usually there's more than one narcissist in a family too. And you can
yeah,
have this whole web of a
yeah.
narcissistic family system, which is basically a narcissistic family cult. And
Mhm.
so when you want to connect to your family, but there's several narcs in there and they kind of take each other's side, it just becomes really isolating and lonely
Yeah,
and it's
yeah.
invalidating. And so, because there's no emotional safety in those
No,
dynamics, right? There's no
no,
emotional
no.
safety. If anything, it's the opposite of emotional safety.
Well, and it's not just the narcissists. It's that every individual person in these family systems or these social systems has had to come up with ways of dealing with the narcissist. Right. And so this is why siblings split up, because some like, look at the kind of scapegoat golden child. The scapegoat safety comes from speaking the truth. The golden child safety comes through proximity to the narcissist, right? And mirroring the narcissist and presenting to the world what the narcissist wants. And those things are at odds. And so, through no fault of their own, family members come to different understandings of this stuff. Like, they come to different coping mechanisms, and it kind of fragments and fractures the family system in ways that kind of unity and cohesion become difficult to achieve amongst the kind of victims or the non-narcissists, because everybody's dealing with this disordered person, and everybody usually kind of gets a different version of them, like, where, because of the nature of relationships, the narcissist, people will say, like, well, I think the narcissist is in control of their behavior because they behave differently, when we're out to dinner, and but the reality is their behavior is dictated by the nature of the relationships they're in, right? And so they don't it's not so much that they're in control, it's just that their need for supply dictates different behavior in different social situations. Like, I really don't think they're in control. I don't think any of us are in control of our behavior, as a caveat, just looking to Robert Sapolsky for that. But like, they I know they can intentionally lie to people, absolutely, but they're confabulating most of the time, right? There's limitations to their ability to grasp a shared reality that are real, that are rooted in the way their consciousness and their psychological profile is arranged.
Well, we can get back to that confabulation point in a second, but I wanted to circle back to how people even handle the narcissistic people, because even the ones that aren't narcissistic, they might turn into flying monkeys, or
Mhm,
they teach other people to abandon themselves. And
mhm,
that's how they have dealt with the narcissist in their lives. They
mhm,
tell their kids or brothers and sisters or whomever, oh, just people please them.
mhm,
People please them, continue to jump through their hoops,
mhm,
continue to try to seek their support and validation,
mhm.
but that's also not good, right? That's like
No,
not a good way to go about it. And it
no,
kind of primes those kids, like you said, to be with narcissistic romantic partners growing up.
it does. It does. I mean, a good example of this would be my sister. And so, things got really ugly between me and my dad. My dad is a kind of like spiritual narcissist. He owned a really large new age record label. He's been a yoga meditation teacher since long before I was born, and would say to me my whole life, come back to me when you're not angry.
Hmm.
And so, as I began, I got sober about a year after getting sober. All of the trauma, all of the emotions started coming up, and I made a commitment to myself that I would feel whatever was coming up, right? That I would just learn to feel and express. And so I had a lot of anger towards him, and it got really ugly. In that process, some guy called me from Staten Island and is like, "Oh yeah, I'm your brother. Your dad's been hiding me for like 20 years," and I fucking lost it. Nobody in my family to this day has talked to me about this. But anyway, like, it fractured me and my sister. And my mom said to my sister one time, "Well, what would you do if this were your kids?" And she blurted out, like, "Well, Christoph would never let it get that far. That's her husband." Right. And then she realized what she said, which is, "Oh, yeah, this is dad's fault." Right. And now, if my name comes up, she just won't speak. She's just completely avoidant. Right. Her safety comes from not acknowledging the reality that she knows in her heart to be true, which is my dad's a fucking narcissist. Right. But there's also money involved. She's the executor of the will. All of these factors get intertwined. Um, but in that moment, it was like you could see, like, she knew on a certain level that this isn't my fault. I'm the one that's kicked out of the family. I'm the one that doesn't get to see my nieces and nephews, even though one of them is named after me.
Mhm.
And he gets to stay. I mean, at one point she said, like, when she first started having kids, like, if mom and dad bring their bullshit around the kids, they won't see the kids. But like, is my dad having a secret son my bullshit or his bullshit? Right? I mean, and why do I not have a right to be mad about that? And like, have somebody, because my sister wouldn't talk to me about it. That's what fractured us. I'm like, texting her, like, "Hey, we got to talk about this guy that's contacting me, who's telling me he's our brother," and she wouldn't respond. She wouldn't respond. And then, yes, I lost it. I got extremely angry with her too. And like, that's on me. But like, I think anybody in this situation, trying to heal my trauma, trying to learn how to feel, and then this reveal of this guy, like,
She wanted the
it was
ostrich routine.
it was a lot. She what now?
She wanted the ostrich routine to kind of
Yeah.
sweep it under the rug, not address it, not deal
She
with
just
it.
and look, I love my sister. I miss her. I wish none of this happened, but she doesn't want to look back. She doesn't want to acknowledge it. Um, but in my mind, allowing her children to have relationships with them is questionable. I mean,
Well, I mean, and what do you think really gets in the way of getting people to understand this? And there's two sides of that, right? There's the people that actually have lived it and
mhm.
should potentially understand. And then there's the people that never have. And so for them, it's even, I think, even more difficult.
Well, I think it butts again, I think like narcissistic abuse hides in kind of cultural expectations, standards, and norms. And so the norm is like on some level, your parents love you and have your best interest in mind. And I think it asks people to think a little bit more deeply about free will, about the reality of what it means to be a narcissist. I think it's one of these words that you say that like everybody kind of has a different understanding of what it is. And so people's ability to understand isn't really there. People see things through the lens of their experience. Um, and I just think narcissism as a whole challenges a lot of deeply held beliefs about the nature of human beings. Like I really believe that it's such a different form of consciousness, that it's operating from a different motivations, it's just arranged differently, like the way that they kind of interact with self, other, and reality. To me, that's where the disorder is. But it's a psychologically difficult thing to kind of understand, I think. And so, because it is, I mean, finding the right language is one step, and then finding the right person to tell that language to be witnessed and understood is another. Because being understood is like manna from heaven for the children of narcissists. That the pathway to healing, is finding somebody. If we're saying they're always reflecting back, the wrong thing is finding somebody to sit with that can reality test and reflect back without having to over explain what you've gone through, and just be understood and believed.
And that's just even you saying that, that's what you just don't get in those
No,
narcissistic families. Being understood and accepted, that's
no,
just
no,
not gonna happen.
no.
And that you're gonna instantly feel that too, right? There's certain people instantly straight to that antagonistic
Mhm,
energy,
mhm,
belittling energy, finding something wrong with you, and then keep on emphasizing it, etc.
mhm,
It's just, and people would say, well, oh, just try to be more understanding with them or work
mhm,
on your communication with them. But
mhm.
anyone who says that, it's like, no, you just don't understand.
You just
You
don't understand.
They don't
The
understand it.
entire reason I can talk about this the way I can is because I thought if only I can fucking explain it to these people, they'll understand. But you can't convince somebody of something their psychological profile is hiding from them. Their entire, this debate about like whether narcissism is rooted in trauma. I don't know. But if it is, the entire structure is there to defend them from looking at it, right? From looking inward at their trauma. I think if it's rooted in trauma, it's an early attachment wound that's pre-verbal, precognitive, and like basically makes it so that like they can't connect to anybody, right? We can get into kind of different theories, but like there again, they upend our expectations for humans, right? They're not living in the same reality we are. They're not actually sharing reality. Like we all see things from our own perspective, right? We're all in our own perspective, but healthy people's perspective understands that other people have perspective, and that reality is a negotiation of shared perspectives, right? It's like take the word like freedom. This is a way to kind of explain this. To a narcissist, freedom means their freedom to do anything, right? To do anything, total freedom, right? To a non-disordered person, freedom is a negotiation, understanding my freedom and your freedom have to be in kind of, you know, like respecting one another. That it's not simply about, I get to do everything. But the narcissist is truly incapable of recognizing other human beings as individual autonomous human beings with their own realities, their own feelings, their own thoughts. You are what the narcissist tells you are, tells you are, right? They'll tell you what you're feeling, they'll tell you what you're experiencing. They'll pull you into their reality through brute force just by never actually reflecting back to you, where the eventually you give up, especially the kids. I mean, you have no chance. Like a parent, I mean, a parent child relationship is the most authoritarian relationship we have on planet Earth. And so the child, in some ways, I got off easy because my dad's more just doesn't care. Like I've never heard him raise his voice, not once. And
Can be
people say,
tricky.
because he's a yoga meditation guy, people are like, oh, he's really mastered his emotions. I'm like, no, bro, like he doesn't care about another human being enough to exert that much energy. Like, so he just doesn't care. Um,
And that's a tricky thing too, right? When they can be abusive and gaslight you in a calm tone of voice,
oh
that's
God.
sneaky in its own right.
He come back to me when you're not angry. He said that over and over. This guy told my mother he didn't want to be a husband or a father because it was boring. There was so much anger. But this is the thing about growing up in a narcissistic family. There's trauma like in every other family. The problem is nobody's with you there. So like them getting divorced, right? Like I'm 7, the worst age ever. He just stops talking to her. My mother is completely like emotionally wrecked for 3 years. And to this day, we've never sat in a room where I get to describe how I felt about all of this. Instead, by like the age of 13 or 14, I'm sent to therapy by myself because where are these emotional problems coming from? And so we have all of these traumas piling up. We have all of these so-called mental health problems. But meanwhile, the Rosetta Stone, the driver of all of them, the disordered parent, is nowhere in the conversation of any of this. So you start therapy under false pretense, right? Because you're starting under like basically the gaslit reality of the unreliable narrator, right? Where I'm angry, I'm this, I'm that. And I am all of those things, right? But like there's actually a pretty easy explanation for this, right? I mean, I still think about that. It's like, or take this, like when I was 21, I dropped out of college. I had a really great girlfriend in college, really healthy, one of the healthiest relationships I've ever had. I was not good in the relationship. She broke up with me. I had a meltdown and dropped out of school and moved home with my dad. My mother, who's histrionic, decided she was going to have an intervention and put me in rehab. And so they all got together, talked to this therapist. They got my dad involved. The shit they were saying was totally crazy, but it was, I stayed because I'm like, oh my God, this is the first time my family's ever been together in a room caring for me. So I'm going to go. They assured me we're all going to be here. If you do this, we'll all be here for you. If you don't do this, we're going to abandon you, which was therapist ripping open my abandonment trauma. But anyway, I did it. And the next morning, my dad announced he was going to Hawaii and not coming back until I was out because it was too heavy for him. Then, when I finished 2 months later, all these people they paid tons of money to said, you got to live with your dad for 6 months. You can't live on your own. After 2 weeks of living with my dad packed my bags and said, I got you an apartment. My wife doesn't want you here. And so it's trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. It begins with the trauma of this broken relationship, right? Then dropping out of school, then going to rehab, then being abandoned, then the trauma kind of I call it a 7-layer salad of trauma. That it's like this layered stuff because nobody's actually ever in your life, and so
Right.
the trauma kind of metastasizes because it never gets dealt with. Um,
And and you are just the problem in all of that, in their
right.
perspective, right?
Right.
It always
I'm
starts
the
with
pro.
you.
I'm partying all the time. I'm like, the shit they said, like
It gets you on your back foot too, right?
in
So
the intervention was crazy. My sister, who I never saw, so she had no idea what drugs I was doing. It didn't affect her life at all. She said, "Oh, you came to Madison, to my graduation, and when we were leaving, I saw all these pills, like." On the floor of your car, like implying they were like ecstasy pills. And I go, those were Prilosec pills because I was literally throwing up stomach acid because of how like traumatized I was. But then I tried to talk, and the therapist would say, "You're manipulating. Shut up. They're going to abandon you if you keep talking."
the
My
therapist said
stepmother
that?
said, "Yeah." The people that arranged the intervention, my stepmother said, "You think your dad's going to give you some high-paying job in the music business?" Which I didn't think. But that was it. I'm thinking, where's the drug part? Right? Where's the drug part? My dad said I crashed his Mercedes. Okay, I did do that. But the story was I actually waited until early in the morning to sober up, and the crash wasn't my fault. It was all just complete nonsense because they're not in my life. They don't know. Did I need to go to rehab? Probably. But they didn't know any of it. It was just all control and power. And so it was
Well,
really
it's like you say, they see everyone as props, objects, or pawns. I think that's what you
props,
said, right?
pawns, or containers. Yeah, yeah,
Container, that's the other one, yeah. But
yeah.
that's what it is. Like that's
Mhm.
all everyone is around them. And it starts with they aren't the problem,
Right.
you are the
right.
problem.
But
Everyone else
anybody looking
but
at that,
them.
it's like, okay, like, because they'll say, well, your sister was okay. All right, well, why don't we look at where a child is in childhood development at the age of 7, at the age of 10, when everything fell apart? All of it has a pretty easy answer. But again, I had to be the problem, right? It wasn't that my parents stopped talking. I mean, this is the biggest narc dad move ever. My dad one time sent the phone company, I'm old, to my stepdad's house to put a phone line in my room without telling anyone. He didn't tell anybody, just so he didn't have to say, hi, is Chris there? Like that's the level of like discard, and how he wouldn't even speak to my mother. He wouldn't even look to her. To this day, they can't be in the same room together. They literally can't. Like when they're seeing the grandkids, they can't overlap. It's sick. But like I was the problem. Now I had tons of problems. There's no question about that. But like they weren't coming from nowhere, and they weren't being solved because each time, I mean, I say to my mom, like, why would you involve dad in this intervention? We knew who he was by then. Well, I thought he'd participate. He would never do that. He participated in the intervention and then left. And
She didn't understand what he was.
no,
She mustn't have.
she didn't understand. I've helped my mother a lot actually, and things have been tough between me and my mom, but they're good now because she's actually made an effort to understand I'm telling the truth. I sometimes get a little weirded out because I think when we think of intrinsic value things, it's like, oh, now you believe me when I have like hundreds of thousands of followers, right? But you didn't believe me then. But again, with her, I kind of made a decision that I would find compassion, because quite frankly, I witnessed what he did to her. I might have been a 7-year-old kid, but like my dad chewed my mom up and spit her out and then just left her with these children. He was making tons of money. They had to garnish his way. It just fucking behavior that like, I always joke with this restraining order. All he got was like angry emails. I've never put a hand on that guy. And he got off easy because the shit he did to my family, I have every right to have rage for. And, I mean, it's one of those things where I don't like getting into this angry space because I still can draw on that rage. I mean, I could tell you a story of this restraining order hearing and it's literally insane. We'll just say at one point the judge threatened me with contempt of court for laughing at my dad, but he was just like lying,
Right.
lying, 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 sharing pictures of me in mental health crisis. I took out my stress ball because he's literally ripping my trauma open. The bailiff comes over and rips my stress ball out of my hand because I might throw it at him. It's like, bro, I'm not throwing this at him. I'm actually dealing with being traumatized right now. But, I mean, the court's ability to see these things. I mean, he got up on the witness stand and said, like, well, I thought the relationship was fine until I wouldn't take him to Hawaii 4 years ago. Now, okay, partially true, but the real story is that he started going to Hawaii over Christmas in the 90s, meaning I haven't, and this is in 2021. I haven't spent a Christmas with my dad in over 20 years. He never brought me or my sister and then decided he wanted to start bringing my sister and her kids because for some reason narcs want to be grandparents. And yeah, that is when I had a meltdown, but it wasn't because of Hawaii or me wanting money. It was me wanting to spend Christmas with my family. It's as simple as
I
that.
heard my friend, I think she said this, Adriana Bucci said that narcissistic grandparents see grandkids as emotional support animals.
Yeah, it's also like what is success in retirement, right? It's grandkids. What do the prop? What do you put on Facebook? Look at all my cute grandkids, right? And yeah, it's like they don't,
Image,
they're
image,
not attached. Their shame is attached to their children. We bring them shame. We don't bring them pride. There's something that like once they get to the grandkids, it's just like this little doll for them,
right?
But
But another crazy making part for the kids of the narcissistic parent is they can often appear to be nice to other
mhm,
people. And
mhm,
they'll say, like, other kids your own age or adults, kids your own age, they'll say, why can't you be more like that person? And they'll appear to be very supportive and validating and
yeah.
understanding of them. But then when it
Mhm.
comes to their own kids, completely different story.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and they can even appear to be involved in their children's life, but they're involved in the idea of the child they have, not the actual child themselves. You know what I call them is Potemkin parenting. You know
Yeah.
what a Potemkin village is? It's like
No.
so like you've got an autocratic dictator and they want to prove to the world that they're successful. So they'll go into this village and there'll be like a storefront and it's filled with fruit in the storefront. And then you open the door and there's nothing there, right? It's all form, no content. The narcissist always wants to appear to be the thing, but has no actual interest in being the thing. And so with parenting, it's all for show. There's no actual connection to the child. They certainly do not have the child's best interest in mind. And in fact, a lot of times they're sabotaging the child. They're literally jealous of their children.
Yeah, I could see that. And I think you brought up an interesting point about the confabulation and then free will piece too. I do think sometimes it is
Hmm.
confabulation because you see it where it's like they do truly seem to have a different perspective of reality. They think it's
Hmm.
something else,
Hmm.
but I think that's true sometimes. And I think other times, no, not
Yeah.
confabulation.
Yeah. Yeah.
They
Yeah.
definitely know and they're just
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
an absolute
Yeah.
dick on
Yep,
purpose.
yep, yep, yep. Absolutely. Like I don't think it's an either or. I tend to think of them as like experiencing reality, like this movie that they have in their mind, but like they're both everyone and no one. And so causality gets all jumbled up. But like if you spend enough time talking to them, you can see confusion in them in keeping track of reality, that
Mm.
that it is a reality distortion disorder in a lot of ways, right? That like this is probably a bad metaphor, but I always almost think of it as like reverse schizophrenia, right? Where the schizophrenic mistakes elements of their own consciousness, of their own self, as something coming externally, right? As I'm hearing voices that are not me. The narcissist displaces their internal sense of self onto the external world, right? Into the containers around them. Because they can't hold responsibility, they can't hold their emotional states, and so, in order to maintain their grandiose false self, all of those things have to be placed into other people. Like when they say, like, every accusation is a confession, I don't think that's a strategy. I think that's a psychological compulsion that they can't accept anything bad about themselves. And so they're displacing themselves into other people because they don't differentiate really. In this movie, in their head, everything is them and nothing is them, if that makes sense. I
No,
know
that makes sense. I think, and how they try to insult people, they're also telling on themselves what
yeah,
they find important too.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
say a narcissist that values money, they'll be
yeah.
calling other people brokies,
Yeah.
or someone who values looks will make sure they call people fat and ugly,
Well,
right?
well, yeah. This restraining order complaint with my mother, who's a former model and a gold digger, it said all Chris wants is money. It's like, dude, my dad worked in a mine in Colorado when my sister was born. This woman wouldn't have like looked at him. She's the one that wants. I wanted a dad. Do I want money? Sure, everybody wants money, right? I mean, it's not completely untrue, like, but like what I have always wanted in my life was a dad. That's the other thing. The money becomes the only connection to them. And so we become like, it's like learned helplessness, or kind of like learned dependency, because you take away that connection through the money, there's no connection, there's nothing there. And so I think when I look at my life, it wasn't just not being kind of like parented or trained for functionality, but I think in some way my mind, and it might be my mother screaming like, your dad doesn't love us, he doesn't give us money, that then equated this idea of being given money with love, and then off you go. And so, removing that money connection, there's nothing there. Here's another good example. It's like, of how there's no connection. My dad had season tickets to the Bucks. I live in Milwaukee, right? And so we would go to Bucks games all the time. Now, it turned out in hindsight, he was running a tax scam where he was writing the tickets off and then selling half the season to his buddy who made money off the books, let's say. Um, and after he retired and couldn't run the scam, we never went to another basketball game together. So this wasn't something like, oh, this is our tradition, we really like doing this as a thing. It was just a tax scam, right? And the bonus is I get to go to a fuck ton of basketball games, which was awesome. But like it was also, oh, I get to spend time with my dad. It was our time, and then all of a sudden, nothing. Like this was like 2000. He would say it was because he lived across the street from the coach and he didn't like him, and the Bucks like went from going to the Eastern Conference Finals to sucking in 1 year. But it was really just that it had no value. Like he just doesn't. My aunts and uncles would say he just doesn't care, and he doesn't. It's sad. I mean, again, like some of these things, like I almost feel shame for saying because they involve like being given things, and like people will say first world problems or something, but it's like illustrating this complete lack of actual connection, of shared like space, right? Where
Right.
like, yeah, we like doing this, so we're going to continue doing it. We used to go to movies all the time, never go to movie, I mean, it's
I mean, and to me, that's one of the most difficult things about the narcissistic people is usually the things they try to attack people with, they'll take a grain of truth and they'll twist and
yeah,
distort
yeah,
it
yeah, yeah, yeah,
or
yeah, yeah,
exaggerate it.
yeah.
And again, it can be really confusing because often it can almost appear like there's a little truth in it, but then like the way they twist it and distort it and warp it, it just
Right.
turns into this
Well,
completely different thing.
yeah, it leverages the subjectivity of the human experience, where people will say, "Oh, this might just be a different perspective." Like when I said, my dad said in the restraining order hearing, I thought the relationship was fine until 4 years ago when I wouldn't take him to Hawaii. What's actually happening there, right? Number one, he's slandering me as a spoiled brat. It's all about money. But number two, can you prove that he's lying? He said, I thought the relationship was fine. No, most people would say, well, that's just subjectivity. Nobody, not a single person who's witnessed our relationship would think that's true. In fact, everybody would go, that's actually insane to say. But you're sitting in court. Do you have time to actually like explain all of this stuff? Would the judge even believe it? No. So they're hiding in context. And a lot of times you're right, their lies aren't like, and they can totally whole cloth make shit
Oh,
up.
sure, sure.
But a lot of times their lies are blunted by the recognition that people get subjective interpretations of shared experiences, right? And so it's overlapping with reality in most ways, but it's not reality. Causality, who did what, all of these things get kind of jumbled up. And so it becomes very hard because this is how it splits social systems, because then the people are left going, well, who do I believe? It's basically Rashomon. It's the same event told from different perspectives. But if you're not factoring in that we're dealing with a pathological person, it can be very hard. Because the other component is when the narcissist is lying and we know they're lying, but nobody else does, they're doing it with cool, calm, like demeanor. We're experiencing being gaslit. And so we're put into emotional distress, and we end up looking like the one that is the kind of unreliable witness or
Mm.
unreliable narrator.
And they seem to be experts at putting people into that position too, where
Oh,
they'll
yeah,
bait, provoke, be
yeah,
antagonistic, and then they'll be really quick to pull out that camera to start recording you if you
yeah.
have a reaction. I see this happen to a lot of women. And
That's my one regret about this restraining order thing, is that I was committed to being angry, that I had to be angry, and whatever was going to come out was going to come out. And I committed that to myself. But again, it did get really ugly. It was public. I put shit in writing. And if I had to do it over again, I would recognize I was kind of giving him what he wanted and needed to continue scapegoating me. And I probably would have been a little bit smarter. But my brain was shut off at that point, and I was just like learning to like not think but feel. And what I felt was just this titanic rage coming up in me. And again, I had committed myself that I would open my feelings up, and I would feel them, because I went to this woman. It was like a mental health I don't even know what you'd call it, but she would try to get me into my feelings, after I got sober for about a year and started realizing it was trauma. And I literally just sobbed for like 3 months. Every time I'd go in there, I'd just start sobbing. It would just be this like complete and total like sadness and despair. But once that's, sadness and anger are in this weird circle. But like once the sadness was gone, it was just this titanic anger. I was angry at what he did to my mother. I was angry at what he did to me. I was angry at what he did to my fucking family, right? And pretended he didn't. And like, again, like I've had to process a lot of guilt and shame over some of the things I said, and some of the things I did, but I can understand where they were coming from, because he also, here, I'm a lunatic. He said to my mother, like, if Chris doesn't stop, I'm going to get a restraining order. So I started writing things that were actually confessions, that were like, if you hurt my niece and nephew the way you hurt me, I'm going to drive up there and, whatever. And so as he's reading these things, because a narcissist, when he's just with his wife, oh, look at Chris, right? They don't realize what's being said. And so when he said it in shared company with the judge, he started crying. Now everybody looks at that and goes, well, he's crying because this is a difficult thing. He didn't have to do this. he's crying because I put words into his mouth that he didn't really want to say.
Right.
But again, I don't. I felt really proud after that. I don't. I have a very different relationship to that event, and I really actually. There are elements of it I regret that I wish that I had not went so hard. But when we're learning to feel and we have all of this rage, I,
And that's crazy making too, though, right? Where in the process of healing and doing things, you make mistakes, right? You might do things you
yeah.
regret, and then those things get thrown in your face, and you get
Mhm,
any little thing they'll weaponize it against you the best they
mhm,
can.
mhm,
And I think some of this has to do also. I'm on the autistic spectrum, and I think you've said
mhm,
you are
mhm,
too. And I
mhm,
think that it makes people more sensitive to some
mhm,
of this stuff. If I had to guess, and I think narcissistic people in particular, it seems like they enjoy targeting autistic people. There's just
mhm.
something in them
There is
that
something there. Yeah.
I'm not sure what the connection is, but to
Yeah.
me, it seems like there's some sort of connection.
Yeah, yeah. I used to talk about this more years ago because I've it's been a difficult aspect of healing of kind of the acceptance of self of neurodiversity autism and it's actually kind of sad in a lot of ways when you start to think about how our basic needs weren't met but also these special needs it just clouds everything but they do there's something about narcissist and autistic people where the narcissist just senses something, and people will say they can present similarly. And I think that can be true in certain situations. But like the autistic person is masking for connection, the narcissist is masking for exploitation.
Mm,
And I think that's been a really hard thing for me to kind of make sense of because my family doesn't believe me. My mother, I'll say like, I'm autistic and like I don't think she really believes me, but like it's honestly really obvious to me when I look at my life, that like I've never really experienced relate, it's just it's one of those things when
right.
that it's I don't do you follow that Professor Saul, I think his name is on social media. He's a ADHD coach. He's pretty good.
I actually don't know if I know him.
Yeah, he's pretty good. I forget what his last name is.
I mean, because I've never officially been diagnosed with it. They gave me all sorts of other things though back in the day, and I think
Yeah.
looking back on it now, to me, they would have diagnosed me with Asperger's, but now they don't even
Mhm.
call it that anymore.
No.
They just consider that part of the autistic spectrum. But looking back, it's pretty clear to me when I look
Yeah.
at the self-medicating with alcohol and drugs, and then
Hmm.
I hear other autistic people's stories, people that used to be called Asperger's as well.
Hmm.
It's like, yeah, that's me. Like that was
Yeah, the way
exactly
I
my
process
experience.
information, like I have pattern recognition, like all of
Yeah.
this stuff. Like I've probably read so much less on narcissism than people think. Like it's more that like I understand it as a system of consciousness basically. Then you
Yeah.
have like the way I learn. Like I can't study. Like I was in college for 6.5 years because like I can't study anything that doesn't interest me.
Mhm.
Right. Like I literally can't. And so um just everything. Like there's I couldn't like tie my shoes quickly, right? Like I think I got a D in kindergarten in tying my shoes,
Sure.
and then all of a sudden I did it differently, which was fast. Just there's all of these kind of clues that I was not experiencing um, things like everybody else,
Right. And I
Right.
think there's this thing where narcissistic people, they love to try to trigger autistic people into meltdowns, like
Mhm,
really like building them up, and then like trying to tear them down. They get
mhm.
this sadistic pleasure, it seems, from doing so.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think when we talk about malignancy, it's the same thing as saying sadistic. It's getting some sort of gratification from the physical or emotional distress of other people, right? But again, it's rooted in power and control. If I can make you upset, I'm powerful,
Yep.
right? It's like the whole comment section, like you mad bro, you mad bro, you mad bro. It's like no, actually, you're the one who's mad, but okay, you know. But it's them trying to have power over you by eliciting like a response,
Yeah.
and then gaslighting you about what that response is and where it's coming from.
It's hideous. I mean, And you mentioned the courts, you mentioned therapists and other professionals.
Mhm.
I think some of those areas can be sorely lacking right now. But I mean, what are your thoughts on our criminal justice slash like the therapists out there in the world, like trying to help people with this stuff?
I think the criminal justice system, or family courts, any court system has a really hard time with narcissism, spotting it, understanding it, caring it exists. I think anytime you start off on equal footing with a pathological person and they're taking the pathological person's perspective at equal as yours, you're at a disadvantage. Um, as far as therapists, I think, and therapists always push back on this, but like I don't think a lot of them get it. I mean, I do this for a living, and the common refrain I hear is not that therapy wasn't helpful, but it wasn't helpful in this area, right? That it's something you almost have to go through and live through to truly understand. And that what happens is, I mean, there's a couple things that happen. Number one, we can have therapy weaponized against us early on, in which case we almost parentify the therapist and we become this really engaging therapy patient, but it's through the lens of people pleasing the therapist, right? And the other thing that can happen is they just miss it, right? That like we go to therapy, but we're going there through the lens of like I said, like we're depressed, we're anxious. Like the main thing is missing in the story, and the therapist's ability to kind of understand what we're going through, I think a lot of times has to do more with lived experience, which they're actually trained to keep off the table, right? To have this kind of like professional wall, which I can understand why it occurs. But in this particular situation, adult children of narcissists need to be validated. They need to, it's there's a different rhythm to how this type of thing needs to be dealt with. Where, I found IFS to be really nice as a modality in dealing with this because I think it's about accepting our parts and getting to know ourselves. But I truly believe with therapy. Somebody asked me the other day, "What's the best modality for this stuff?" And I really think that the practitioner themselves is the variable. The modality is important too, but a lot of the success or failure of therapy will have to do with finding the right person for you, and that's incredibly hard to do a lot of times.
I think with therapists, the hardest part for them is, and the same with clinical psychologists, LCSWs, et cetera, is it's just a completely different experience reading about this
Hmm.
stuff, the way it would be presented in the
Hmm.
DSM, for example,
Hmm.
versus how these behaviors and traits display themselves or how the
Hmm.
narcissistic operating system
Hmm.
actually displays itself in real life, in the wild.
Hmm.
Completely different.
Hmm. I think we have like I really think the broader conversation of narcissism online, I think is kind of dumb. In fact, that we have like a very cartoonish understanding of what they are, and I think the children, because the narcissist doesn't mask for their children, and they're kind of looking up and seeing them in different situations, we can kind of see it a little bit more clearly if we know what we're looking at. But yeah, and I've had really good therapists. I mean, I was first alerted to my dad's narcissism from a therapist. It was like 2004 or five. I was living in Minneapolis, and she gave me this book called Trapped in the Mirror and said, "Your dad sounds like a pretty obvious narcissist." But then what do you do with it? It's like making that assessment was really nice. It opened the door, but like it took me 15 years to really kind of come to an understanding of what that meant in our relationship, what that meant in the story of my kind of mental health journey, we'll call it. And that like it's kind of like going to rehab where like you do a lot of work with therapists and in groups, and then they tell you just to go to AA. And a lot of the healing comes from healing with other people who went through what you went through. And I think that applies here as well. And again, like this isn't to like when I started on social media, I had a lot of anger at therapists, and I'd be kind of rude. Like they do this comment, I'm sure you get a lot, like therapist here, and then try to like tell you what's what. And I'd be like, nobody paid you. You're behind a paywall. Go take your therapist to your bullshit and get out of here. But I have since let loose some of that, and like I really think we're all in this together. I just think therapy in my own life and in the hundreds and thousands of people I've talked to, it's just been a mixed bag for us. That it's not that like, and I don't even think it's intentional. I just think this is dealing with narcissism, dealing with the effects. It's something that is incredibly complex, and it really takes being empathetically witnessed and kind of understood. And I think a lot of times we get in these loops of trying to explain to our therapists over and over and over, and whether they get it or not is about who you're actually talking to.
And that reminds me of Gabriel Mate's definition of what
Yeah,
trauma,
that's where I pulled that from. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, lack of an empathetic witness.
Yeah, I think that's really true though. I mean, when we talk about what this this mirror, right? What is an empathetic witness but an accurate mirror of yourself? Somebody that's witnessing you, reflecting back to you with empathy and accuracy what you're actually going through, right? And so it's really important for people, especially early on who are struggling with this, to find somebody that can validate them, that can kind of reflect back to them the truth of what they went through.
Kind of reminds me of like a portrait of Dorian Gray, where like the picture is the one that gets all distorted in that book.
Mhm.
But when you're dealing with a narcissistic person, it's like now the inside of you is what turns into that picture. The picture is distorted in the book, but the inside of us is what
Mhm.
gets distorted when we're with a narcissistic parent or just
Yeah,
narcissistic relationship partner.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, that book "Trapped in the Mirror" has a Caravaggio painting of Narcissus, enraptured by
Yeah.
his reflection. Now, to me, I think the narcissist, if it's the narcissist, it's more accurately a vampire. When they look in the mirror, they see nothing, right? That their core self is not there, or they see this grandiose self. Like, I think we make a mistake when we say they're all ego. I don't think they have an ego. An ego is a healthy development that allows us to go out into the world, take criticism, and do all sorts of things. I think they lack an ego. And in that lack of ego is this replacement of the grandiose self, right? This kind of like a healthy self is something we're experiencing inwardly and expressing outwardly, right? The narcissist sense of self is an external thing they're creating, not experiencing, right? And so it's a very different experience of consciousness.
I know there's a lot of debate between, oh, are they high self esteem or just an inflated ego? I mean, you would say no ego, right? So, but at the end of the day, I don't think that part even matters
No,
for the rest of us. It's
no,
like,
not at all.
what are we doing in our lives to heal? And as a coach yourself, or I guess, do you consider yourself a coach?
Sure. I don't know what to call it.
Whatever you would call it. I mean, where do you see people get caught up? Or where have you yourself got caught up in your own healing journey?
Well, I think you just nailed it. Where we kind of like ultimately, people want to know like, is this person a narcissist? Is that person a narcissist? And it's very difficult to diagnose other people, right? And even narcissists. I don't believe the vast majority of narcissists are diagnosed, even if they go to therapy. I think they miss it a lot. And so I think the mistake people make most is keeping the focus on the narcissist, because healing from narcissistic abuse is not about understanding the narcissist. It's not about healing the relationship with the narcissist. It's about understanding yourself and healing your relationship to self. And so it takes actually personal responsibility, not for the abuse, but for what
Right.
it means to us and where our healing lies. And I think people get really caught up in keeping the focus on the narcissist, right? And instead of saying like, I've had, and I think I've mentioned this on before, but I've heard people say like, if I can convince myself I was in a relationship with a narcissist, I no longer view that relationship as consensual. Now, I can 100% understand why somebody might want to think that, but I think in service of healing, we did agree to this relationship. Now, we could say it's under false terms, but like nobody's exchanging full psych workups on their first date, right? And so, in order to protect ourselves, in order to grow, we have to take ownership over our lives and say, I do have the power to choose differently. I do have the power to not get involved in these relationships. But that takes personal growth. It takes learning to be alone, for instance, right? It takes kind of building up our own autonomy so that, and trust in ourselves. Because I think, it's like why do we stay, or why do we not recognize the red flags? A lot of that has to do with trust, right? A lot of that has to do with us not wanting to be alone. And so I think keeping the focus on the narcissist in some ways, like, keeps the abuse active, because that is the abuse. The narcissist becomes the centerpiece of your
Right.
consciousness, right? And so the healing comes when we just push them out of the way and make it about us for once, right?
Yeah. I
I
mean, and
mean,
that's what I call unsubscribing, right? When you
yeah, yeah,
unsubscribe and
yeah,
you stop seeing things through the way they would see it. So
yeah,
examples of
yeah,
that would be, I'll see people say, I don't want to block the narcissist because I don't want them to think they got the best of me or they
right,
got to me. And it's like,
right,
well, you're seeing it all wrong. If you're
yes,
actually looking at it through that lens, you're still seeing it as how the
right,
narcissistic person in your
right.
life's going to see it, not what's best for
Right.
you.
Right. Right. Instead, it's I'm blocking them because it makes my life better, and I don't give a single fuck what they think about it.
Exactly
Right.
right.
I mean,
And,
that
and
like,
and another version of the same thing would be some people have said, I don't want to enforce consequences on them because I don't want them to be able to play the victim. It's like
right.
wrong. No, you're doing the same thing, just in a different
Exactly.
way. Like unsubscribe. Do what is best for you,
Right. Right.
regardless
They're
of
going to
what
play
they
the
would
victim
think
no
or
matter
feel about
what.
it. Yeah,
They are going to have this pendulum swinging between grandiosity and victimhood no matter what you do. Right. And
exactly.
so it's about understanding we do what's best for us. Right. It's about, again, it's like, we talked about extrinsic versus intrinsic value systems. It's similar, but it's like external locus of control versus internal locus of control. Am I reacting to the narcissist in my behavior, or am I acting out of my own self-interest, right? And so learning to act out of our own self-interest is a big part of it, is to just say, like, I don't care how they're going to respond. They are a disordered player in this relationship, and they don't respond. You can't dictate their behavior. That's the trap, right? Is the belief that, like, if I do this, they'll do that. That we can kind of manipulate them, but like it usually, you can't bullshit a bullshitter.
No,
I
the
mean,
way to win is to not play their game, is what
right,
I
right,
always say.
right. Because anything you give them, they'll use in a certain way, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, again, like with this restraining order with my dad. I think that's why, like, I'm a little like, I carry a lot of complexity in that, is because I did play the game. I did give him what he wanted, which was like me not in the family, but also this very thing he could show everybody. Look at these crazy things Chris is saying. Like, look at how he's behaving. Look at him on social media talking shit, like, um,
It's
but
understandable though. I get it. I
but
get.
that was my thinking, was like, I don't care what he does. I have this
Right.
anger. I need to express it. I have this truth I have to tell. But again, again, we have to forgive ourselves for mistakes made in the service of getting to know ourselves and learning how to feel. When all of our feelings are repressed in life and we don't know how to feel, it's something we don't know how to do. And so anything we're starting out and learning is going to come with a learning curve, and like, I didn't want to be angry, but that's what I was. And so it's like, we don't get to choose what we feel, we get to choose if we feel, right? So, like, our conditioning, our nervous system, whatever creates feelings, decides what feelings are elicited. Our choice is whether to feel them or to repress them, and
Right.
and
I mean, that makes sense to me. And it's like they say, you got to feel it to heal it.
yeah, the feeling is in the
And
healing. Yeah,
yeah. And so I think just giving ourselves the permission to
yeah,
do what is best for us, despite the uncomfortable feelings that we get when we put ourselves first, getting rid of the people pleasing, getting rid of if there's defensiveness or
mhm,
whatever else is out there, right? Those are the things that I've seen people struggle with the most. And it's not
mhm,
easy. It's not
mhm,
easy in any way, but I think, and this is one way I've changed my mind over time, actually. I'm all for people being more black and white in the beginning now. I used to be a little more nuanced with
mhm,
things. And it's like, and the reason why I'm this way is similar to what you said before, where you said when a narcissistic person in court, their perspective is seen in the same light as the other person, kind of puts you at a disadvantage because you hear this other distorted perception of reality getting equal credit. It's like, oh, it's hideous. And so that's why I think the black and white thing is important in the beginning. Like
mhm,
forget the nuance in the beginning.
mhm,
Like
mhm,
no, black white. they are
Yeah.
this way, and the behaviors will tell the tale. Then don't pay attention to the label as much anyway. Just
Hmm.
how are they treating you? Are they
Hmm.
doing all the things that we say narcissistic people do?
Hmm.
Well, then if so, act accordingly.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. I
That's
mean,
it.
that's what I tell people too. Is like the diagnosis doesn't matter so much as the behaviors that were directed at you and what they've done to you. And so in some ways, I would never use this as a diagnostic criteria, but there's evidence in how we're traumatized, right? Because these systems kind of operate in specific ways, therefore they're conditioning us in specific ways, in sustained contact or sustained relationships with them. And so, it doesn't really matter what they are. It matters like what they've done. I think the one area where people really want to know is that how do we set our expectations? Like I think it's like helpful to know, because then we can say, okay, they're not going to change, right? But if we're 40 years old and it's our parent and they've never changed, regardless of what we call them, we've got 40 years evidence that this person's unwilling, incapable of changing, right? Of actually seeing us and seeing our pain, and actually kind of acknowledging our humanity in a lot of ways. Hey, buddy.
Right? And that's where just healing and trying to navigate through, even once you're aware of narcissism, like you and I both understand it, but there's still things that can pop up because the past can circle back around sometimes. I know I was telling you about a situation with one of my family members before we
Mhm.
started recording,
Mhm.
and it pops up whether you want it to or not sometimes, just because
Yeah.
like you go no contact because you know that's what's best, but that's not the end of the story.
No, what is that line from Magnolia? You might be done with the past, but the past isn't done with you.
I saw that quote the other day. You said that with a Megan. It was a man. Megan Mann was the
Oh no,
name.
that was it's not what you thought when you first began it, right? Which I think about like trauma healing, where I think when we start it, we think there's this like destination of healed, of this mountaintop that's got unicorns and rainbows. But when we really get into it, it's actually about learning to feel a lot of really difficult things, and kind of learning to engage with our suffering and engage with life on a different level, not have suffering, right? Not be free of it, but be more accepting of it, be less kind of have our behavior less controlled by it, right? Be in more control. I always think of like compulsion versus intent, and getting away from compulsion and into intent.
And her name's Amy Mann, right? Is
Amy
that her
Mann,
name?
yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah,
the
yeah.
a
She's
good movie.
brilliant.
Though Magnolia's a good movie. That and One's the Loneliest Number and all that.
Oh
It's
yeah,
good.
yeah, yeah. I love it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's up for a guy with daddy issues.
Yeah.
Like
Well, the
it's
Tom Cruise scene in particular, maybe.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I also like that Tom Cruise scene where he's being interviewed by a black woman, a journalist, and she's just taking him to like cutting through the kind of grandiosity and the false self of this kind of like Andrew Tate type guy, and it's just brilliant. I love that movie. I watched it recently with my girlfriend.
That's a good one. It's one of those ones you can watch and pick up on something new every time you do.
Well, I think low key, a lot of Paul Thomas Anderson's movies have themes of narcissism. I think There Will Be Blood is the granddaddy of all narcissist movies, where it's like dueling narcissism between like Daniel Plainview, who represents like not just narcissism, but like capitalism and unbridled capitalism, and then Eli Sunday, who represents kind of spiritual narcissism and religious fundamentalism doing battle, but
Yeah.
it's a really well written narcissistic movie. There's another one actually that was called May December. That's kind of the female narcissist like component, which was it's got Julianne Moore and what's Natalie Portman, and it's about Mary Kay Letourneau, who was that like teacher in like the '90s, I think, that got in trouble for like sleeping with a young student. And it shows the different facets of narcissism there too, where Julianne Moore and Mary Kay Letourneau is a specific form of narcissism, and then Natalie Portman's an actress, and she's kind of this other like mimicry form of narcissism, right? And it's really brilliant.
I haven't seen that one, but I definitely have seen There Will Be Blood. And I
Yeah,
think,
yeah,
like Eli Sunday, do you consider him more of a covert
yeah,
narcissist? Is kind
yeah,
of how I would see
yeah,
him.
yeah. But there are scenes where the mask comes off. He's all
Oh, yeah.
about self-interest. The Master, I think, also like the Philip Seymour Hoffman, L. Ron Hubbard movie, like that has heavy themes of narcissism. Like that character himself is a narcissist. What else? Like Punch Drunk Love is like almost like a BPD movie. Like, like there's just a lot of psychology in those films.
I mean, also, we were talking about this before we started too, but you think narcissism, one of the biggest issue facing society at a whole right now, right?
I do. I do. People with too much power and no empathy. There's that old saying like absolute power corrupts absolutely. I don't think that's true. I think that certain people view power as absolute and that narcissists have a skill set that seeks out power, that navigates social hierarchies well. And that we have a world now. I, mean, I think it may have always been this way, but like we're being run by narcissists and sociopaths and psychopaths. And like when you look at like the tech bros, for instance, I mean, think of Mark Andreessen saying he has no introspection. It's a celebration of narcissism. Now, I will point out, saying you have no introspection is introspection, so it's bullshit.
Yeah.
But you see, Peter Thiel, all of these guys. I'm calling narcissist. That like there's just a lot of people in positions of power. I mean, look at Sam Altman. Read some of the stuff that goes on in Sam Altman's birth family. Like, look into what his sister is saying. And, I mean, you hear Sam Altman, they're now starting to call him that, but saying he just lies about everything, right? And shit that, like, there's no reason to lie about, right? These people are in charge of technology that's going to change the world, probably not for the better. They're in charge of governments. They're in charge of, and I think when you look at the story of humanity, there's always this split between empathy and no empathy, right? Between like I think narcissism occurs culturally too, in the scaling out of culture. I call narcissism interpersonal colonization, that you see the logic, because what is colonization? It's not just taking land, it's placing one reality on top of another, where the colonizing force comes in and you're forced to live by their laws, pray to their gods, speak their language. That's what a narcissist does. It pulls you in and forces you to live in their reality completely. And so you see the individual pathologies of people reflected in social systems. But I really think, I mean, where does empathy come in the human story? Is that evolution, the recognition of other people's perspectives, the ability to, I don't know. I mean, but I tend to think it's, you had Elon Musk saying empathy is the biggest weakness of humanity. That sounds like a narcissist to me. I mean, it's thinking of other people. I mean, it's.
To me, he's fairly proof that someone can be both comorbid, autistic, and
I
narcissistic.
used to think that wasn't true, but he certainly makes me wonder because he's weird as fuck too. Yeah,
I think if they can be comorbid, I think they
yeah,
definitely can
yeah,
be.
yeah. I don't know how all of these things like interact, but yeah, he's something else.
I mean, and because today, what it's April 7th, basically Trump today, he did
Yeah,
threaten to basically nuke Iran.
right,
That's what's on the
right,
table today. And we're
right.
living in, there's been so many things happening since he got into office here. There's
Mhm.
like so much to keep up with that in pre social media years, like the first 6 months of stories would have been talked about for years. But now we're living in this cycle
It's just
where they throw shit up against the wall
yeah,
and there's so many things going on that's just it makes your head spin. And I think that's part of the point though too.
it
When your
is.
head's
Yeah,
spinning, it's harder to call out.
yeah.
But we're living in some dangerous times right now. And I think that can't be understated.
Well, sure, you can look at Trump, and so when we talk about like controlling them through leverage and consequences, closing the Strait of Hormuz is a consequence he wasn't prepared to deal with. And so you see him swinging between we're going to save them and we're going to exterminate them. And what he's trying to do is remap a way to feel like he's in control because he's lost control of the situation. And they have imposed real consequences that he can't get around because just go look at the price of gas, right? And so like he doesn't know how to actually negotiate. The idea that that guy's a master negotiator might be one of the funniest things I've ever heard in my life. It's not true. The guy bankrupted casinos. Do you know how hard that is to do? They
True.
print money. The house always wins. So unless it was some sort of Sopranos style bust out where they were doing it on, again, but with him, um, to me, he's the most obvious narcissist on the planet. People may not like that, and they don't like
He
talking
definitely
politics.
has a narcissistic operating system. That's
Yeah,
what I would say. And I
yeah,
think the interesting part about the climate today is there's like half of the Republican side seems to be calling it out because of his support for Israel, and then the
mhm.
other half just seems to be blind to it, etc. So it's actually the most criticism he's gotten from his own side ever,
Yeah,
really.
yeah, yeah. I think it's hard to know, but yeah, there does seem to be a fracturing of the coalition. That like this particular issue, because of all the things MAGA has kind of believed, the no new wars thing was one of the things I agreed with. Now I recognize like America exports war. It's a business plan, actually, and that there's actually never going to be a president of either party that isn't drowning in militarism, right? And Trump specifically, the idea that there was no new wars. Look at what he's doing in Venezuela, but they should be upset, right? They were out here saying that, like, no new wars. We're voting for him to not get into any wars. But it's classic narcissism. He just says a bunch of shit on the campaign trail he doesn't believe, and then they lap it up. And they say one thing last year, and now it's like, oh well, we have to do it because it's a bad regime. But you guys were saying we're not the police. It's literally the opposite of what they were saying. But you see
Right.
how this functions like a cult. In authoritarianism, right? It's not what's done or said, it's who says it or does it. It's the same thing as narcissism. So the support is for the person, not what's actually happening. And so they can say the opposite of what they said a year ago and feel no hypocrisy, because it's never actually about the reality or having consistent positions. It's about he's right and you're wrong. Right. MAGA is a political movement of malignancy. It's malignant. Fascism is always malignant narcissism reflected in political systems. You should
Oh,
read
that's a good way to put it.
reading Eric Fromm, and specifically Escape from Freedom. I believe like that he coined the term malignant narcissist for Hitler, right? And so when narcissists get political power, authoritarianism follows, right?
And again, the no new war thing, that's a pretty clear example of okay, there's a very clear tweets from him,
Hmm.
Tulsi Gabbard, and the same thing with the Jeffrey files as well,
Hmm.
right? There's very clear examples of them wanting them out. And
Yeah.
now you see how the goalposts have been shifted. You
Hmm.
see people that are going to twist and distort things now. It's very
Hmm.
clear because
Hmm.
certain people
Hmm.
have at the very least stuck to the guns and said, well, you said no new wars. And now
Right.
here you are having these new wars. And like you see a side of Tucker, Candace, Nick
Hmm.
Fuentes, and a few others. They're calling it out.
I
And then
find
there's
myself nodding my head to people I never thought I'd be nodding my head to, but I think as Americans, there has to be some return to some sort of common thread amongst us, right? I mean, there has to be, but it comes with consistency, right? Like no new wars. That's great. No new wars. Let's stop spending all of this money on guns and weapons. But Trump just asked for $1.5 trillion in his military budget. And are they freaking out? They should be. I mean, $1.5 trillion. And yet giving us healthcare is socialism. Isn't giving us a military socialism too? It's just something that doesn't do anything for us, right? I mean, what have we gotten out of all of these wars? Nothing. It's just feeding, it's just transferring government money into the private sector. War is the greatest business plan and the most profitable endeavor that capitalism has created, and therefore war will persist as a means of conflict resolution because it's actually about making money. I mean, just look into Donald Trump Jr. and his like some sort of like golf company is merging with a drone company, and they're talking about never running out of drones. You're worried about Hunter Biden's fucking laptop, but you're not worried about this. Again, it's about consistency, right? It's not about like red or blue. It's about this is what I believe, and I don't give a fuck what color, what gang color these guys are wearing. Politicians are all dirty. And so if again, like it's we need to like understand we have been divided and conquered through our media, through all of these things, to be fighting a culture war against one another, so that we're not actually like looking at the real problem in this culture, which is wealth inequality, which is, corporate, all sorts of ways that the working class people are not really being taken care of, right?
Right. I
But
mean, and they've convinced people, right? The conservative influencers, they've convinced people that anything even resembling a socialized medicine, oh, it's communism.
yeah,
And it's like, dude, you just don't really understand what's going on if that's what you
right.
think. There's going to be there
But
socialized medicine will not be perfect. There's going to be different problems with different systems, but
yeah, yeah.
you could probably say it's going to be better than the system for a majority of people.
We have to understand post New Deal, and there's a great book called, what was it called? One Nation Under God by Kevin Cruz, who's a Princeton professor. There's been 100-year long propaganda campaign to demonize socialism, right? Which is again like I don't like to think in ideological terms, but believing we should get something out of our tax dollars, I don't think that's a radical position, right? Like when we look at the military budget, and especially when you consider like the military budget largely goes to a different style of warfare that's no longer like we can have all the aircraft carriers in the world. Like who the fuck's having a naval battle? Like it's simply just like taking government money and tax dollars from the government and placing it into the private sector, into military companies. It's just a transfer of wealth, right? And so this should be a bipartisan issue. We need to stop this, like, seeing everything through the lens of tribal politics. Like that's how they get us. Is that like it becomes about the person or about the party, and like Democrats too. It's like this war stuff. It's not exactly like it's not just a problem with Republicans. Obama was bombing 8 countries by the time he left office,
Yeah.
right? And so let's. I don't know the answer.
I
We're
think
so
you're
far.
like me. You're like me in the fact that I don't think you identify with anyone, any side in particular. And I think right now there's a very unique opportunity considering so many people are breaking from Trump on the right. So that's going to leave them a little more open, per se,
Mhm.
to influence that maybe before they wouldn't have been as open to. So, in a way, that could
Again, like
be
we
an
have to start
opportunity.
trying to find some like threads together. Like some issues, can we find some issues to be bipartisan, right? Can we find, I mean, we'll look at the files, right? Like, so you have a guy like Thomas Massey, who I don't agree with on basically anything, but watching him work, I go, okay, look, this is an issue that is real. And this is a person that I have real fundamental policy differences with. And yet we can come together. Again, it's a
He did
really,
good on that. Thomas Massey, I was
he
I
did,
was
yeah,
glad he
yeah.
did. Him and Rokana and who was the other one? I
I
think there's
try to
Marjorie Taylor
listen.
Greene even.
Yeah, I try to listen, to things that challenge me, right? Like I think it's true that algorithms have put us into our own echo chambers, right? This algorithmic herding, and that it's up to us not to agree. Somebody said once, I forget who said this, the height of intelligence is hearing something and not like adopting it right away, or some shit like that, where it's like listening to things without having to kind of,
I mean, you reminded me of something. I mean, one of the things I've been struggling with recently is, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on politics and current events, but depending on the platform, you just can't say one word without people instantly shutting down or unfollowing you, and it hurts you in a hundred
Mhm.
different other ways in life. To me, that's discouraging, and that's kind of made me more cynical as well.
Well, let's think about the internet and the introduction of the internet into human culture and how that might have affected this, right? Where we've forgotten how to disagree with one another, but it's largely because we're interacting too much. We know too much about each other, right? And so the internet has created this shared space for people. And instead of bringing people together, and a lot of this has been open psychological warfare. There's a reason Cambridge Analytica and bots and all these things. But what it's done is like driven people apart instead of brought them together, right? Because you can find your community on the internet regardless of who you are. So that can be great for trauma survivors, right? not so great for neo-Nazis. Right? I mean, and so you have I really, I mean, this is kind of shifting topics, but it's like I really think we're living through a time that has been destabilized by the introduction of the internet, smartphones, and social media into, this shift in information systems, right? From like print media and television, which was very imperfect but controlled streams of information, right? And so we had a more coherent version of reality because we were all kind of digesting similar information or similar. And I don't think we all realized the power of algorithms until recently, that like we weren't all seeing the same internet. Not even close, right? We were all seeing something. It's like personally tailor-made information, but like our individual personal realities are made up by the information we take in. They're made up by what we experience directly, and then the information we take in indirectly. And the internet has thrown those two things out of whack, where because of the scope of information, we're now taking in, we're like aware of everything going on in the world in real time. And so the ratio of like how we make up our reality, in what we directly experience versus what we hear about, it's radically shifted into our realities are now being shaped by what we're being told online. And that's really dangerous because we're being manipulated, right? Like the internet's been a couple things: a place to sell us shit, a place for like porn,
Yeah.
and psychological warfare. We don't think of the internet as a border, but it is. It's a border into our minds, right? That like there's, and so I really believe a lot of the dysfunction we're having has to do with the internet's impact on human culture. That shifting in information systems usually leads to disruptions in cultures, right? When you look at Nazi Germany, for instance, the way they leveraged radio and film technology, right? So that was new technology, and they leveraged it for propaganda. They leveraged it for all sorts of ways. You look at, I forget what book I was reading this in, but it's like when the printing press was introduced, you had the witches scare where like 50,000 people were killed for being witches, mostly women. Um, and so I think, we've had this massive change, and AI is going to accelerate all of it, but it's like
It was scary.
we haven't really grappled with how carrying around these phones that are connecting us to everything going on everywhere has actually changed how we interpret reality, how we interact with one another, and all sorts of things.
I think a big part of it is politics is much more of a discussion for everyone now. I think before
Mhm,
you could kind of avoid it. You could
mhm,
live your
mhm,
life, and
mhm,
politics, unless you
mhm,
were going out of your way to talk about it, there's a lot of people that just didn't pay much attention to it. And
mhm.
honestly, it wasn't always the worst thing. Like, granted,
Well,
they'd
it's a
always
good question. Like, how present should politics be in our lives, right? Like again, I'm not
well, I mean, Dwight Eisenhower said politics should be the part-time profession of every U.S. citizen, and I
part
get
time,
it,
part time. Yeah.
part-time, yes. But here's the other problem, though. How good is that really if there's people that are kind of seeing things through a distorted lens and don't quite understand what's going on, and they only choose to view one side? That's
Hmm.
why I think it's so important to listen to everyone, because they're all giving you, to an extent, lies of omission. They're trying to
Hmm.
manipulate how you see things because they think their way is the right way, and
Hmm.
understandably so.
Hmm.
But until you're going out of your way to look at everyone, you're not getting the entire picture. And I think the social media algorithm, I always say, just like a narcissist, because it responds to the same things.
Hmm.
What does a narcissist respond to? Attention,
Hmm.
attention.
Hmm.
And it doesn't matter sometimes, even if it's negative attention. The one thing it doesn't like is being ignored.
Right.
What's the social media algorithm like? Ah, it wants attention. Doesn't matter if it's positive or negative attention. The one thing the social media algorithm doesn't like is being ignored.
Right.
So when that's the case, and especially when you can do whatever you want to do despite any morals or values, you can act with no principles
Hmm.
just to get attention,
Hmm.
and the social media algorithm's still going to reward you. Like, there's
Right.
no mechanism now to stop that. The mechanism used to be social stigma, I believe,
Hmm.
but now
Hmm.
there's really not that much of that.
Yeah, and fear and anger sell. And, at some point, like advertisers figure that out, that fear and anger are the two emotions that keep people watching more. The algorithm seconds that, where rage bait, anger, division, those things drive the algorithms more than anything,
Well,
right?
I
That,
think there's just no concessions. I think that's
yeah.
the biggest thing I see is people have their tribal thinking,
Hmm.
and then they can't admit when they're wrong or
Hmm.
even be open to a new perspective. And I think
Hmm.
if anything's changed, I think that is it. Because there's always been tribalism.
Hmm.
There's always been people that didn't want to admit when they're wrong. I just think now it's a little more widespread, and I think
Hmm.
social media has enabled that to
Hmm.
happen a little bit.
Hmm.
And there needs to be some adults somewhere to be able to call out their side and admit, you know what, this person's gone too far. It doesn't
Yeah,
happen very often. And
it doesn't. It doesn't. I mean, I see this a lot, as somebody that probably, I lean more left, and there's a lot of pushback when you start criticizing Democrats amongst Democrats. And my perspective is, I'm going to criticize the people I vote for because I vote for them, right? And that, like, there, to me, the system is broken, right? It's a corrupting system. Citizens United was the nail in the coffin of this introduction of, basically just so much dark money that our government's for sale. And so, to me, it's not so much about always. It's similar to narcissistic abuse recovery, where it's like, instead of making it about the narcissist, we have to look at the politicians we're voting for too. It can't be that we can't criticize the people we vote for. And I get that vibe a lot. Like, why are you criticizing this person? Well, because I voted for them and they didn't do what I thought they would do. Now, do I, again, it's like,
well, you know what
um,
they'll say to you? They'll say, well, you can't have that integrity if the other side's not going to have the same integrity, I guess, right? That's
right,
what
but
they would
then they've
say.
won, right?
Right.
Then, like, if I can't criticize the people I'm voting for because of fear of the other side, then they've won. Then they've won. Then speech has been silenced, right? Then criticizing our leaders has been silenced. And I don't. I mean, I obviously think one side is more corrupt than the other, or whatever you want to call it. But, like, it doesn't. Criticism of Republicans isn't endorsement of Democrats, and vice versa. It's like, this is also what happens far too much. Is like, you'll say one thing about one, and then they'll take it to mean this corresponding view about the other. And two things can be true at once, and honestly, when I look at what's happening in this country, I blame the entire system and everyone participating in it. I don't look at, again, I think, it's the way out of this is critical thinking and doing away with tribalism, right? Thinking about things, um, free from ideological concerns.
And you got to think, how does that happen? How does it get created? I think profit motive is a
Hmm.
big part of it, right? So on YouTube and other social media platforms, you can pander to a side
Hmm.
and you'll get rewarded for it. Doesn't even matter if you're stretching the truth or manipulating or whatever, you'll still probably get rewarded. And I think, how
Hmm.
do you prevent that kind of thing? I don't know the answer to that question. Part of me also wonders, I mean, the American Republic, the American Empire here, we're what, 200 years old plus,
Hmm.
250, whatever it
Hmm.
is. I mean, how long do these things last anyway? I don't know. And so, what is that going to look like? What's that going to look like moving forward here when AI comes up and all the jobs go, or a lot of jobs go? There's a lot of uncertainty that's in the future that's not very far away either,
Not
for
far
that
at all.
matter.
Not
And
far at all.
I don't know what's going to happen with it, but there's a lot of things that'll make your head spin if you think about it. And it's hard
Well,
for me not to get cynical. Like I said, I don't know.
I don't even know what cynicism looks like anymore, to be honest, because I think when you're seeing things clearly, people will accuse you of being cynical because they're seeing the world with rose-colored glasses, and that we are actually living in an incredibly dark world right now. When I look at these technocrats, I've been reading this passage from The End of Reality on social media for years, since before the election, of talking about some of the technocrats and how they've used Trump to kind of usher in. They don't have loyalty to nation states like we would think. And that, like, in a lot of ways, the destruction of the dollar is a plan for them because they want to shift everything to crypto that they can manipulate. And I really think what we're watching is the controlled destruction of the American economy, um, by a kind of this is, by a bunch of people that have essentially bought our government. I mean, JD Vance is a political creation of Peter Thiel,
Yeah,
created him, right? And so why was JD Vance chosen as vice president when he had historically low approval ratings? I mean, what is the dark enlightenment? Who is Curtis
I think
Yarvin?
he got Tucker Carlson's thumbs up. I think too.
Yeah, yeah. I just think, like, I think we're moving into dark times, that, like, AI, the way it's being, they always sell these massive technological advancements as ushering in utopia, but profit motive dictates that it's always dystopia, right? Because I look at profit motive as the narcissistic supply of capitalism, where it's this not so hidden motivation, but there's really only one business in capitalism. It's called making money. And so whatever the stated function of the business is will eventually be bent over the knee of profit motive, and distorted, right? That you're not really a hospital, a place of healing, you're a place of profits. You're not really a restaurant of a place of food, you're a place of profits. And that when it comes to AI specifically, um, the biggest profits are going to be in mass surveillance contracting. I mean, it's already happening. Like, we don't think of AI, right? There's a great documentary out, the AI doc, right now that I just went to see, and I mean, it's such an interesting issue because it's totally polarized. There's nobody going. It's just kind of going to be okay. It's either going to kind of solve all of our problems and usher in utopia, or it's going to destroy all of us. And there's very little space in between those two outcomes. Um, I just tend to think the social, political, and economic conditions in which it's being unleashed will probably lead to disaster, right? Like, this demonization of socialism, the obvious answer is taxing the fuck out of the AI companies to create universal basic income because of all of the unemployment that's coming. But we live in a world where that's not politically, you know, possible, really. And so then you look at ICE and all of these detainment centers, and you start to wonder, what does that look like when employment hits 30% and there's all
Right.
these people in the
I
streets,
think
right?
even Republicans might come on board with that at a point. Because what do
Mhm.
you do?
Yeah.
What do you do when there's 30% of the people that don't have money? What happens then?
Well, it
I,
shatters the illusion of what's a job for? What is all this for? To create a system where all of us can live, or to create profits for, like, a tiny, tiny fraction of humanity? And this particular issue is kind of like exposing, because we're not dealing with it maturely. Everybody knows it's going to fucking take so many jobs. Like everybody knows that, right? That, like, because it's not LLMs. We look at the AI all wrong. We're looking at it through Chat GPT, when it's going to be AGI, which hasn't been unleashed yet. Like, artificial general intelligence or artificial super intelligence. I listen to a lot of these guys like Tristan Harris, who are talking out against it and saying, like, this is a moment in humanity that's never occurred, where we're going to create something that is exponentially smarter than us. And what will that look like? Right? Like, we will no longer be and then you start to consider that there's, like, a tiny handful of human beings making these decisions that will, like, literally affect all of us, and
yeah.
I don't want to be a doomer, but I'm skeptical that it can be unleashed in a way that doesn't, like, create disaster.
I think one of the more difficult things that prevents us from coming together is the fact that there's two completely different ways to see the world now. People can look
Mhm,
at the same things, and depending on what you believe, you see that very same thing in two
mhm.
completely different lights. So how do you find a way to talk to both sides in a
W-
way?
we're no longer having we're living in different realities functionally, and people,
Yeah.
whatever side they're on, they're not going to want to like this because like they want to believe that like everybody's operating on the same information with the same critical thinking skills. That's not true, right? If you've been watching Fox News for 20 years, your reality is functionally different than somebody that's been watching MSNBC, right? And we can squabble over like who's right and who's wrong and blah 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 blah, but the reality is it's no longer political differences. It's a difference in the reality we're living in, right? Because again, reality as a concept is much more fungible or malleable than we think it is. That it's made up of each person lives in their own version of reality. Now, culture, right, and information streams are there to try to normalize that experience, but our cultures become fractured, our information, think of like the fairness doctrine. I don't know if you know about
Yep.
that, but like, so Reagan repealed the fairness doctrine, which said like there would always be both sides of the issue. It would start with a shared reality, right? And then there would be people arguing on both sides. The fairness doctrine is repealed. Rush Limbaugh is created, emerges. Fox News is created. Cable news in the 24-hour news cycle comes. And it's just siloed off everybody's reality that we're no longer operating from a shared starting point. It's the entire, they're silos. And like when that happens, it's very difficult to get back.
Right.
I mean,
And that branches out into many other areas
oh
too,
yeah,
not just politics, right? I
right,
think
right,
I see
right,
the same thing with music, for
right,
example. Back in the day, you could go to a Live Aid and watch
yeah,
Freddie Mercury
yeah.
or be watching Led Zeppelin in the 70s or whomever. And there's more shared experiences because I think there's less options back then. There's just less options of music for people to enjoy. But
But
it
there
did,
were spaces that were like not subject to political splits, right? Like I feel
yeah,
like sports is one of the last places where people are like cohabitating. But I just saw some guy got banned at a hockey game for a Nazi salute or something. That's kind of, but it
it,
is. It's like
it's hanging on by a thread,
where is the
sports.
shared culture, right? Where is it, right? I also, you might laugh about this, but it's like I think streaming has fucked our culture, right? Where cultures like there's no, we're not watching the same things at the same time, right? There's no more water cooler shows because we're working from home and everybody's watching something different at a different time. And so the threads that were holding us together, it sounds stupid, but it's true. Like
No,
TV and
it's true.
movies
I agree.
were shared experiences, that like, and now like I think Lost was kind of like the last
Stranger
shared
Things.
experience. Okay, Stranger Things maybe, but yeah, I didn't watch it. But yeah, I mean,
I
I
didn't
watched
watch it
some.
either, but that was, I think, one of the last ones, which is why it became a thing. And
They were all watching. Yeah,
Game of Thrones, I think
Game
as
of
well.
Thrones. Yeah, yeah. But it's gotten to a point where, and I love TV, right? So this, I shouldn't be complaining, but there's like too much. It's not.
Yeah,
It's fractured our shared experience, right? And that we're held together culturally through a lot of things we may not think of, and again, it's like finding points of connection, knowing that the political sphere is disconnection and has intentionally divided us, finding spaces, I mean, I don't even know. I mean,
well,
it's
we're
got,
close in age, and I think I saw
huh?
this post that said people that were born between 75 and 85, they got their feet in two different worlds, right? They
Yeah,
got
I've been saying that forever. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
pre social media world and what that looked like, and now post social media world. And I can very clearly divide my life into those
Oh, yeah.
two parts, right? I was about 24 when I got my first smartphone, 24 or
Mhm,
25. So that
mhm,
was 17 years ago, 16 years ago for me now. But
mhm.
and before that, life was completely different. It just
Oh, yeah.
felt like there's so different. And in a way, we're both kind of benefiting from the fact that we do have social media now. My life wouldn't be
Mhm,
the same without it and
mhm,
streaming, etc.
mhm.
But with all the good that comes with it, there's certainly a good chunk of not so good too.
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot. I got my first email address my freshman year in college,
Ah,
and so it's like, or maybe I had like a Prodigy email that I never used when, I mean, but I don't know, or AOL or something. But it's like we were raised in one world and then it shifted. And so we do kind of, depending on how you look at it, we can understand how much the world has changed. I think that's one of the interesting things about technology is like the people that are born with something like the internet can't imagine a world without it, right? They literally can't imagine what it's like to not have the internet, to not carry around this phone in your pocket. Like, we can, and I think, to me, it can be really destabilizing, because you really start to see, like I feel like I'm technologically stupid, like I'm not good at, like, I can plug my Xbox in and play the fuck out of some video games, but, like, like interneting, I'm horrible at, like, I don't know, it's
I'm pretty shitty at like editing and doing the. I should probably be hiring editors and
yeah.
whatnot. And I mean, and the other thing that makes me feel old now is someone could be born in the year 2000 and they're going to be 26 this year.
I saw Cooper Flag, that rookie for the Mavericks, who's awesome. It was
Uh,
born in 2006.
That's
Because he
wild.
like he like played LeBron the other night, and LeBron came in the league in 2003.
Ah,
It's like,
that's
what?
crazy.
Yeah, yeah,
I know
yeah,
because the 2000s just seems like
yeah.
because it's a big shift in the number, it just seems like it's not that long ago, but it
It
is that
doesn't,
long
but it
ago.
is. Yeah, I feel like this last 10 years has, like, gone like this, and it's time. Time feels like it's moving differently in the internet era, in the kind of, in where we're at. Like, it feels like, maybe it's just
Manic.
getting old too, but, like, it feels like everything feels like it's moving differently.
Well, they say as you get older, time goes faster or feels like it goes faster because 1 year represents less and
Yeah,
less
yeah,
of your
yeah,
life,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. That
So,
makes perfect
and
sense.
I can see that, but I also think, I think this might even be more true for creators like us that I think there's this manic quality to the creation where you
Hmm.
create the videos and you see all this engagement. And this is something that we talked about this before too. But just the fact that our stuff is out there to hundreds of thousands to millions of people just with a smartphone, that is
Hmm.
something that's never been done in history before. I mean, 20th century, you had movies and TV, that was the closest thing. But now, anyone who has a phone, you can be potentially in front of millions of people. And so you can
Hmm.
be a creator.
Hmm.
You have women that do OnlyFans, and some of them
Hmm.
become multimillionaires now because of that.
Hmm.
And there's so many layers to society now. I mean, there's a gender war in a way. I think that's an element of things that I try not to participate in the gender war,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
it's there. It's there whether I
Hmm.
like it or not. And so it's just there's so many dividing lines that we can all see. Like look at the friends you have in your group,
Hmm.
the friends you talk to. You can probably guesstimate, all right, yeah, this is where they are in this is where they are in that.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
people have their issues. For some
Hmm.
people, the issue is politics. For some people,
Hmm.
the issue is gender war. For some
Hmm.
people, the issue is religion. For some
Hmm.
people, the issue is fill in the blank. But there's
Hmm.
something for everybody now. There's
Hmm.
you see that all and social media is extremely conducive to this.
Hmm. I think a lot about, like, the volume of interpersonal interactions we're having, even if they're parasocial, and how, like, is it really natural to be connected to this many people? That, like, the human mind hasn't really caught up to not just interpersonal, but the information, right? Like, I've talked about this for a long time, where it's like, it used to be you had to be curious, right? Where, like, you wanted to learn stuff, you'd go seek it out. It was an active thing. Now it's about curation. We're being assaulted by information. That information is coming at us at all times. And the value isn't so much in curiosity, although it's still there, but it's in knowing what to kind of push out of the way and what to kind of absorb, and that the volume of interpersonal interactions and information that we're dealing with as human beings, when we really think about it, is head spinning. Like, the difference in how much information you took on a daily basis, minute to minute basis, in 2001 versus now, it's almost insanity, right? And so much of it is like junk food information, is bullshit. It's like disinformation, or things that it would be better if we'd never heard,
Right.
like, but yeah,
I mean, it just has a surreal quality to me. I think the
yeah,
present day to me, it feels surreal. Like, is this really happening? Is this
yeah,
really like
yeah,
what's going on?
yeah,
And it is really happening. But there's this kind of thing that kind of taints it in a way where it has this. It's hard to articulate what I mean, but there's something that you can sense
Yeah.
where reality just is a little different.
It doesn't feel real to me anymore. I feel like we're living in this like shell, this like loop kind of, like this war in Iran as this like shell of the war in Iraq, where everything's just kind of like in this loop and happening the way it's always happened, but it's lacking like it's just like a trauma loop basically
Yeah.
we've kind of like outlived all of these things, but we don't. It's hypernormalization, I think, is what they call it. Is when like things have changed, but we don't know any other way, and so everybody just keeps going on as though it was before. And
That's the
like,
crazy part, though, too, is that we see this happening. We have the
yeah,
information. We know, okay, Iraq,
yeah,
Afghanistan,
yeah,
Persian Gulf 1, 2, whatever it is,
yeah,
right? We see it. We have all this information at our fingertips, but yet the same things still happen anyway.
hmm,
That's another
yeah, yeah,
layer to the cynicism for me. But we have
yeah.
all this information now. So many people know about all this stuff, but even so, the same
It's
things
the effect.
happen.
Yeah, I think it's money though. I mean, I think it's
Right?
like the thing that's keeping us trapped is like centering life around the pursuit of money, right? And I don't mean this in like a hippie, like dippy thing. I just mean that like um, life is meant to be experienced, but we've put everything behind a paywall. Therefore, life is now an experience of dealing with manufactured scarcity, right? Where like we live in a world of abundance. None of us asked to be here. We're all born into this planet, but yet everything's been put behind a paywall, and our basic needs, we have to give all of our time away simply to survive. And I think it's reached a point in our awareness where it's incongruous, right? And it's creating all of these mental health issues and all of these things that the culture then kind of, instead of instead of saying what are we doing, how are we living, that's creating all of these things, it just says how can we make money off them. Right, like it's like depression. Like a smart culture would say what are we doing that's making everybody depressed, right? How are we living and how can we change? This culture just goes, oh, you're weak, let's sell you some pills, right? It's not the culture that's broken, it's you that's broken. It's the individual, not the system. And it's the system, not the individual. Like, I
Right?
mean, spoiler alert, we're not supposed to be living this way. This is
No.
not what, it's,
It's
but
like you say, we're a nation of stormtroopers that think they are Luke Skywalker.
well, yeah, that's talking about like, let me put my Joseph Campbell hat on for a while. The power of mythology and cultural literacy, and how cultural stories, in our case, books and movies and TV shows, kind of illuminate our culture. But it matters that we know who to identify with. And we've been watching stories of the merry band of revolutionaries, um, and identifying with them, but I'm not quite sure that's what the United States is out in the world. Like not at all, in fact.
Right?
And so I think we have body dysmorphia culturally. That like part of what we're going through, and part of the split in the culture is like I've always referred to it as cultural shadow work. Is the reality of our founding and the reality of our history is butting up against the indoctrination we've received within our education systems and entertainment systems. And that it's not about judgment, it's not about determining to be good or bad, but just like shadow work, it's about becoming whole and seeking the truth of who and what we are in order to continue growing. That if we can't accept where we are and who we can't grow from there because we're living in delusion. And I think that's what's happening culturally. Again, I think the internet created this shared space where everybody got together with everybody, but like we were all introduced to, I think it's scared a lot of people. Like I think there's a lot of fear of the other that's baked into our history, of slavery and Native American genocide and the reality. And again, this isn't to say America bad. It's to say let's really kind of think about these things, right? Let's really try to get to the truth of the matter, so that we might live a better life. I mean, if you can't recognize your own darkness, you displace it onto everybody, right? And it comes to control you. And so only through the acceptance of our darkness can we seek to kind of neutralize its stranglehold on our unconscious behaviors.
Right. I mean, to an extent, humans are going to human. They
Hmm.
always have.
Hmm.
It's just a matter of to what level can we get to. I think if you look at history,
Hmm.
there's some relatively decent periods in
Hmm.
history where they never last, but there's been some relatively decent periods. And I think in America here, we're it seems like we're winding down
Yeah.
a relatively decent period, right? The
Hmm.
relatively decent period was after World War II through like the 2000s ish
Hmm.
and up until you might say now.
Yeah.
But it's like, is that really the best we can do? Is that like the as good as it gets? And then we'll see if humans are going to human to a point that it gets much worse, or I don't know.
Yeah. But I mean, even in those times, we've had Vietnam,
Oh,
9/11, and
sure.
like
And that's why I say relatively.
yeah, yeah,
That's not
yeah,
even
yeah,
that good.
totally, totally. That's what I mean. It's like it's you know there's a lot of trauma in our culture that we don't want to look at. Like we can I kind of like look at it like, especially for white people, the trauma of the golden child, right? The
Hmm.
trauma of the favored element, and how it's kind of distorted our sense of self culturally, right? That like, and then seeing, other minorities or whatever through this lens of scapegoat trauma. I mean, I always kind of joke like, every revolutionary is kind of a scapegoat. He begins as a scapegoat. That like, you have all of these dynamics that are working. But again, I think people get too trapped in seeing something that comes from outside of their accepted belief structure, as an attack or as a judgment. And I don't think it has to be those things, right? I think that like it can be an exploration and a search for shared truth. Um, but I took a class once in college called U.S. Nationalism on Film, and it was kind of interesting because it was, about the way that we're conditioned through entertainment, right? That it was, and it was fun for me because we watched like Rambo and like, but also like the Frank Capra World War II propaganda of why we fight, and you begin to see, how our ideas are shaped not just through direct education, but through the kind of cultural soup that we're swimming in, and how like, our understanding of things, for better or worse, usually worse, a lot comes from our mythology, comes from our stories. And so, um it's a scary time to be alive, but I always tell myself, like, we just don't know what's going to happen, right? We don't know. We think we know, and the mind
Right.
is a predictive mechanism that finds safety in pretending we can predict things, but we're living in an incredibly unpredictable time. And that I I don't know what's going to happen, but
Right. I mean, I think there's a lot of people disenchanted
yeah.
with parts of our reality, and I don't know if it's always been that way. I kind of get the sense it wasn't always that bad, or some people did, especially maybe right after World War II. People were like, "Oh, this is great! Like
Mhm.
we made it through the war," and
Mhm.
they really were patriotic. They liked America, and they're like,
Mhm.
and the government did take care of them, like they
Mhm.
did. There was a much different corporate tax rate in the 50s, for example, right?
Yeah.
So
They
there's
never mention that when they talk about making us great again and going back to those times. They never really want to address the corporate tax rates.
no, they leave. Well, lives of omission can do a lot of good work
Yeah.
for them, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I see everyone's disenchanted now, though, it seems.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of how you disenchanted.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah. 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 The disenchantment is real. I mean, I think that's something, hopefully down the road, that can unify people a little bit. We can start seeing outside of the ways we've been kind of divided and conquered. But I think this idea of like humanity, that it's always been a struggle and it's always been messy. And a lot of the changes people want were never going to come through like holding hands and singing kumbaya. They were going to come through struggle and, stuff that's scary. I
Yeah.
mean, we have lived lives that are pretty comfortable in this country, and I think right now some of that comfort is being interrupted, and it's hard for people to kind of deal with. But I think humans keep moving on. We keep it's we keep surviving, and so hopefully we can survive all of this.
Hopefully, maybe we'll unite against AI or something like that. I don't know.
It's like, have these people not seen the Terminator?
Right, something, right? Well, Christian, I always appreciate talking to you. We could talk
Yeah,
for
love it.
forever. But where can people find more of you or reach out to work with you if they want to?
Right now, I'm mostly on Instagram. My girlfriend has it set up where it's also posting on Facebook. I'm trying to get back to TikTok a little, but if they want to work with me, usually just DMing me on Instagram is the easiest way. I've been thinking of getting a website up and running, but again, I'm technologically challenged. And so, all of that.
Hypervigilance on Instagram.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Hype.r.vigilance. Yeah.
The same on Facebook.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Okay. Yeah, because I've been seeing you pop up all over on Instagram
Yeah,
and
the
Facebook
Facebook's been
recently.
been well. I mean, I haven't been on Facebook in years. Like I said, my girlfriend kind of suggested it, and so I just do what she tells me. You know, yeah, it's been. I mean, I don't. It's still like you said about reaching all these people. It's still something that's kind of hard to like conceptualize in my
Yeah.
mind, like the scope and the reach of these things. I had a client ask me last week, like, if I understood the impact I was having and I could feel it. And I don't really, because I mean, they may not understand what it's like to like talk into a phone, hit send, and then our job is kind of done, and it goes out into the world. And like, I'm the child of a narcissist. So it's like for me, I could get 25 people telling me like, thank you, you're really helping me. And then one troll happens and guess which one I'm focused on.
I get it.
And it's
I
like,
get it.
but
I
it's really actually rewarding. And I think you'd probably agree to be able to help people, work in a way that like, for me, like helps me feel like I'm doing something.
I guess maybe have you been accused of not being aware of how influential you are? I know people have accused me of that before. They're like, I don't think you appreciate
Yeah.
what you're doing or don't understand the gravity. And I would push back and say, how can you truly understand it? How can you truly understand the gravity? You see these numbers on the screen,
Right. What
but
do they mean?
it's uh it's not like you're walking into a stadium with 80,000
It's funny.
people
I
and giving
always
a
say that
speech.
actually. I use that same thing. I'd said it'd be one thing if like I walked into a stadium and there's all these people, right? And like or like I was doing all of this in person where I could like reach out and touch, like feel the presence, But I think on a certain level I understand. I just don't know what it all means, Like I'm not like the social media stuff is just it's on a scale that sometimes I'm not sure. Like they asked, I'm not sure I do understand the impact on a certain level. I mean, I just
It's
consider
tough,
I've never written a single video. It's just me hitting record and like
right?
yapping, And so to me, it's like they'll be like, "You remember this thing you said like last week?" And it's like, I don't remember what I said this morning. Like,
I know. It has made me more cognizant of what I say and about
yeah,
what the pushback I'll get from each thing that I say. I know what it'll be in most cases.
yeah.
I know what people are going to say.
Now we got a dog in the chat. I'm dog sitting. Pepper down,
Hey
sweetie.
there, Pepper. So you got a cat and dog there.
I'm dog sitting. Yeah, I got two cats and one dog in the apartment right now, and so it's like animal heaven.
Is he getting deep in the treats over there, as you say?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's about wet treat time. So they're gonna start like trying to eat me if I don't give them their wet treat soon.
I gotcha. Well, I always appreciate you coming on, Christian. You're welcome back anytime.
All right,
If you
brother.
want to join me on one of these lives that I do in the evening, let me know. Maybe we can do
Yeah,
that
that might be
sometime
fun. Let's
too.
talk about that. That would be fun. I haven't done a live at all. I used to do lives like every night. I haven't done them in a year or more.
There you go.
All right, brother.
All right, man. You have a
Be
good
well.
one, sir.